humans look incredibly different from one another. Skin tones shift across regions, facial features vary, and bodies seem shaped by completely different environments. At a glance, it can feel like these differences must come from deep biological divisions that formed long ago. But how did human races actually form? Were these differences shaped by evolution, environment, and migration? Or are they something else entirely? Today we'll explore what modern science says about human diversity and where those visible differences truly come from, right here, on History of Simple Things. All living humans belong to a single species, Homo sapiens. Genetic and fossil evidence shows that anatomically modern humans originated in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago and then spread across the globe. When scientists compare entire human genomes, they find that the vast majority of genetic differences, often more than 85%, occur within populations, rather than between groups historically labeled as races. What we call race in everyday language doesn't reflect deep, separate biological divisions, but instead reflects patterns of variation that accumulated over time as humans dispersed geographically and adapted to different environments. The small physical differences we notice today are recent developments in a long story of shared ancestry. As early humans left Africa, starting perhaps around 70,000 years ago, small groups moved into new regions: Asia, Europe, Australia, and eventually the Americas. These migrations didn't lead to sudden new species, but rather to populations becoming slightly different from one another over many generations. Factors like mutation, random changes in DNA, natural selection, where certain traits become more common because they help individuals survive and reproduce, and genetic drift, random changes when small populations become isolated, all contributed to accumulating differences. Because there was ongoing gene flow, meaning people continued to interbreed between neighboring groups, human variation forms gradients or clines across geography, not sharp, distinct divides. One of the best studied examples of human adaptation to different environments is skin color. Early humans in equatorial Africa evolved dark skin, rich in the pigment melanin, which helps protect against the harmful effects of strong ultraviolet (UV) sunlight. As humans migrated into regions with less sunlight, there was less selective pressure to maintain high melanin levels, and lighter skin tones became advantageous in northern climates because they helped the body synthesize vitamin D from limited UV light. This change didn't happen overnight. It took thousands of years of small genetic shifts through natural selection. Other traits, like body proportions in cold climates or adaptations to high altitude, evolved for similar survival reasons in response to local conditions. Despite the obvious visual differences among human groups, contemporary scientists emphasize that race is not a valid biological category for humans in the way it once was thought to be. Major scientific organizations and research, including statements like the GINA Declaration, explicitly reject the idea of discrete human races based on genetics. The genetic diversity we see in humans doesn't cluster neatly into separate groups that correspond to the traditional race labels. Instead, it exists as a continuous spectrum. The differences used historically to define races, skin color, hair texture, facial features, are superficial, and each represents only a tiny fraction of the entire human genome. In fact, there isn't a single gene that defines a race, and most genetic variation occurs within groups rather than between them. It's important to understand that the idea of racial categories didn't come from nature. The concept has deep roots in social, political, and historical contexts. In the 18th and 19th centuries, early scientists and scholars in Europe and the United States tried to classify humans into rigid racial groups and often paired those classifications with biased beliefs about intelligence, morality, or worth. These classifications were then embedded in laws, institutions, and social hierarchies, causing real harm and reinforcing inequality. Modern science recognizes that these historical race concepts were based on arbitrary criteria and cultural assumptions, not on robust biological evidence. Today, scholars emphasize that race, as commonly understood, is a social construct rather than a reflection of discrete biological lineages. Human populations continue to evolve as environments change and people move and intermix more than ever before. For example, recent studies show groups adapting specific traits, such as metabolic and hydration regulation in harsh environments, illustrating that natural selection continues to shape human biology, but usually in subtle ways. Global migration and mixing mean that genetic diversity is spread widely across populations rather than concentrated within isolated groups. The concept of race in everyday life doesn't capture this dynamic reality. Genetic research shows that human genetic diversity is best understood through patterns of ancestry and adaptation across time and space, not fixed racial categories. So, how did human races actually form? The answer isn't that humanity split into separate races. The differences we see today, in skin color, hair, and facial features, are the result of populations spreading across the globe, adapting to local environments, and interbreeding over thousands of years. These traits tell only a small part of our story and don't reflect deep genetic divides. Genetically, we are remarkably similar, sharing most of our DNA. Seeing human diversity through shared ancestry, adaptation, and continuous variation makes it clear that the old idea of separate races doesn't fit the evidence. Human diversity is not fixed categories, but a spectrum shaped by evolution, migration, and time, a reminder of how deeply connected we truly are. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.